PhD in political science, and she has been working as associate professor at the Department of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Warsaw. She was awarded many awards and fellowships. You can read this stellar biography on her website. I just would like to say that Alicya's work is focusing on the importance of identity, status, and perception for the international activity of states. She's also interested in the topic that I have been studying for quite a long time, ontological security, but also Messianism and the religious factor in foreign policy. Today, she will share with us her thoughts on Russian exceptionalism, Messianic narratives of great powers in a comparative perspective. And lastly, I just would like to say that this lecture is hosted by the Center for International Security at the Faculty of Political Science. Alicja, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction, but before I start my lecture, I think I should tackle the elephant in the room. This is my surname. Everybody was diplomatic enough not to ask me, do I speak Serbian or not, what's with this Curanović? Polish diplomats who I sometimes interview, they're never as diplomatic, and they ask me in a way, oh, you're speaking with an accent. And then I say, no. So the story is, I'm Polish, but I'm married to a Slovenian guy who has a Montenegrin surname. So I speak Slovenian, the most imperial nation's language in, if I say Balkans, maybe they will be offended, but former Yugoslavia. So I speak Slovenian. In Serbian, I know some songs of Bajaga, Instruktori, and Bio Dugmo by heart. And I know some, I would say, life hacks like Sanja Svinja Kukuruz, or, I don't know, Ima ljudi posle rata, but more or less that's it. I can understand basic Serbian, but unfortunately I wouldn't be able to deliver the lecture. But maybe, in some years, that's my unfulfilled dream, I'll be able to do it as well. So having explained this, let's go back to my main area of studies, which is Russia and Russia's foreign policy. And in my research, I usually have to say it when I'm with other Polish colleagues in the room, because Russia is usually the big topic in Polish academia, and most people, they deal with serious issues, security, nuclear things, strategy, and then I have to say, I don't do serious things, I just try to understand how Russians think about Russia's foreign policy, or their, so culture, identity, religion, Messianism. So this is where I come from. This is what I'm interested in. And what you see today, I'm going to talk about Russia's exceptionalism, and that Russia feels exceptional. And there are many scholars who think that this is special about Russia, that it thinks it's so exceptional. And I don't agree with this. I think there's nothing special about thinking you're special, you're a nation. Most nations do it, if not all, right? They try to emphasize that they are special in some sort of way and different from their neighbors. So in this way, Russia is not special. But what's specific for Russia and also for some other countries is that they express their exceptionalism in terms of mission. That they emphasize that they have a special role to play, that they've been predestined to play a specific role in the world affairs. And if we take this kind of group, so countries which think they're special and they claim to have a mission, this is definitely a much smaller group of among all nation states, right? And it happens so that usually these are great powers, but as you know, in Serbia also not great powers think they have mission. I think Poland and Serbia are the case in point here. Also other cases, Israel, we could name. So today I will talk about Russia's exceptionalism, because this is my main area, but I will try to show it in a comparative perspective. So exactly to say that it's not that special, to feel special. So what you see here in the slide, these are three depictions of, I would say, three different Messianic traditions. This is Anglo-Saxon, let's put it this way, this is Russia, and this is Poland, and I will explain in a moment how it works. So I don't know if there is anyone who is actually doing research on Russia. Great. So now you can say if I'm wrong, but I would say most books about Russia's history, culture, politics, They usually have a sentence or two like, Messianism is deeply rooted in Russian culture, or Russia, historically speaking, so it's there, but it works like a self-evident truth, right? And usually, okay, we have books on Messianism as a kind of philosophy or ideology when it comes to the Russian Empire, and of course there are some papers and works about Soviet Messianism, but there hasn't been a research on Messianism in post-Soviet Russia. And this was something I put as an assignment for myself to see whether after 1991 and in bigger close-up since Vladimir Putin came to power, whether Messianic motives were present in Russia's foreign policy. So just foreign policy. As you see, I mean, I worked on the 7 years successfully. There has been a book, so I made it in a way. I analyzed with my team 18 years, so since 2000 until 2018, discourse produced by state officials responsible for creating Russia's foreign policy. So, of course, the president, the prime minister, but the minister of foreign affairs, also minister of national defense, ambassadors of Russia to selected international organizations. So the selection was quite significant. And if you see, we analyzed 25,000 texts. And you say, oh my God, this is really, maybe you think, I don't know, but I assume you can say, okay, this is quite a number. But you know, this wasn't in fact the biggest challenge with this project when it started, because the biggest challenge was how to define Messianism, that it would help us to detect it in contemporary diplomatic language. Because contemporary diplomatic language is secularized, it's highly regulated, and you really don't expect Sergei Lavrov to say every second day, you know, Russia is a messiah, we came here to save the world, the angels told me this. It's not there. So I started with the most general definition of Messianism, if you know, after having read all the smart books. And it would be something like this. This is a vision where you have a providence called God, providence, and providence has a plan along which history unfolds. And in this plan there is a chosen one. It can be a nation, it can be an individual, and the chosen one has to play a certain role for the history to reach its destiny, its conclusive end. And you say, okay, maybe it's reasonable, but then when you start reading more and more of the wise books, then you will see that I counted there are 12 types of messianism. So secular one, religious one, restorative one, progressive one. You say, this won't work. Yeah. So I thought if you look at this definition, in fact, there are 3 components of messianism, right? There is a vision of the history. There is imperative to act, because the chosen one either must act or refrain from actions, but it has to, you know, do something in the scheme of history. And there's universalism in this way that the history, the way Providence designed it, it concerns everyone, regardless you're the chosen nation, you believe it or not. It's simply there. Yeah? And if you look at these 3 components, in fact, if you want to analyze foreign policy, mission will be the most relevant component, because this is how nations frame their actions in international arena, how they make sense of what they should do, of their roles in international affairs, right? So I took mission as the main category, and I thought, okay, mission, then referring to all the notions connected to messianism, it has 3 components. Okay, the assumption that you have a special destiny as a nation. Because of this, you've been chosen. Because of this, you go from the position of moral superiority. And universalism. And this universalism is interesting because it has, I would say, changed the most together with secularization of the language of the politics. Because before, if you can recall, if you can think of traditionally of Serbian messianism, usually messianism is associated with the need to self-sacrifice, right? This is the kind of ultima proof that you really are fulfilling your mission. And even in the Soviet Union, this was one like, you know, we sacrificed for other nations so they could, I don't know, achieve communism or any other, let's say, ideas. And this has changed. And you can see, listening to Lavrov and others, but even starting with 1991, that you don't have to go for a self-sacrifice. I mean, if you want, that's great, but it's enough to make a legitimate claim that you're Messianic if you say that while pursuing your own national interests, you're also including the benefit of others. I don't know, other nations, other community, the whole region, the whole humankind. It's not egoistic, it's not selfish, but in fact by this policy which you're conducting, you're thinking about others' benefits, wellness as well. Okay, so the question now is, because I said that I will talk about the comparative perspective, right? So as I said, we have nations which feel exceptional and they claim they have mission in the world. And they claim very often different missions. So the question would be, why do those missions differ? Why do those mission narratives differ, right? And for example, Alfred Rieber in 1994 said it's culture. He said, Russian imperial mission was no more or less particularist than that of the United States, Great Britain, France, Germany, or Japan. It was cast in a different cultural mode. So following his idea, it means Orthodox countries, they have their Messianic mission, Protestants, they will have their flavor, and Catholics, they will have their flavor. And surely, cultural resources, the influence, how you shape, how you understand your mission in the world, but I would say this is just a part of the story. And I would add to this story the element of status. The position a country holds in the international hierarchy among other states. And if you think about status, okay, there are two aspects of it, right? You have material base, right? So what kind of army you have, what kind of technology you have, the size of the territory, population, we all know that. That's, of course, one very important aspect which allows you to claim a certain status. But there is another one. And this is your ability to create meanings. So the symbolic power, we would call it. It's not enough just to have armies, but also can you claim who's the victor, who's right, who's wrong. So the normative capital. And I think maybe not especially, but for the Messianic narrative, this normative capital is very often more important or as important as the material base. And on this ground, I would say that there are three types of countries in reference what kind of mission they claim. Yeah? And depending on either we are talking about losers, aspiring states, or established states, if they have Messianic narrative, this Messianic narrative will have different functions and a bit different content. So losers, those are states which have no real symbolic capital. They don't have any serious criteria or attributes of being a significant power, right? Then you have established states, and established states are on the other pole. So these are the countries which have material base and they have significant symbolic capital. And then you have aspiring states. So these are states which have some attributes of great power, let's say, it can be, again, territory, population, technology, whatever, but for some reasons, usually these are the lack of symbolic capital, they are not being fully recognized by the established states as their equals, right? And if you have those three categories, it will go like this. If established states refer to mission in their foreign policy, they do it in order to legitimate their dominant position. If losers do it, they do it because they want to compensate for all the calamities which happen to them. And aspiring states, they use Messianic or they develop a Messianic mission for two reasons. On one hand, of course, it's a compensatory mechanism. Since they are not being recognized by the established ones, they say, okay, you think we are poorer, backward, and so on, but in terms, for example, of moral superiority, we stand higher than you. That's the one function. But the other function is that, in fact, they talk about mission because it's an act of emulation. This is what established states do. So if you want to send the signal that you're equal, You emulate, you copy the established states. And very often aspiring states, they have their own sphere of influence, a local one. They are a local hegemon, for example. And then when they are in the hegemonic position, so let's say they are established state in this particular region, when they talk about mission in relations to those states, then they legitimate their dominant position, right? So if you think about Russia and let's say the so-called near abroad, when Russia talks about its mission towards Central Asia, Caucasus, then it exactly legitimates its domination in the region. So, but now, so let's go to the cases. Let's start with comparing loser and aspiring state. 19th century is important. This is definitely a formative period for political messianism, not only in Poland and Russia, but we'll stick with those two cases. So in 19th century, Poland doesn't exist, has been divided by 3 neighboring countries, and we have the whole narrative developed that Poland is a Jesus Christ of nations. So yes, we are suffering, yes, we lost independence as sovereign state, but this is for a reason, because we are going to, with our suffering, save whole Europe, sinful Europe, rotten Europe, and it's going to be because of our self-sacrifice will bring the spiritual renewal, right? So you have glorification of suffering and victimhood. It's a compensatory mechanism. And at the same time, you have Russia, where you also have this current of Messianic tradition with this kind of compensatory element. It's connected to the myth of Holy Rus, but in Russian culture, it's connected to making sense of suffering of the people, of the peasants who are subdued, and so you have to be respectful towards the authority. Just suffer, but you will be safe. But at the same time, you have a second current developing, which is an imperial one connected to the Third Rome, and exactly this messianic narrative which legitimates Russia's expansion towards Asia and Siberia. So 2 different cases, right? And now if you take Poland as a loser, Russia as an aspiring state, and this ambiguous position of Russia shows in those 2 elements of 2 traditions of messianic narrative. And then if you take Poland as a case farther on, it gains independence after the end of the First World War, 1918, and there is no more talk about Poland as a Jesus Christ of nations, right? We're done with that. So now, but it doesn't mean that the messianism is completely gone. Now there is a new messianic figure, that Poland is a Prometheus. So you see the sharp contrast between the Greek hero, which is predestined by the history to save other nations which are still enslaved by the Russian Empire, right? And Bolsheviks and so on and so forth. Yeah. So it's anti-imperial, but with this exactly messianic sense of we are predestined to save them and help. And look how it changes, right? No more suffering, no more glorification of victimhood. There is no talking that Poland should sacrifice its own interest to save these nations. So, and in a way, it's connected to the change of Polish status. We have now a Polish state which is sovereign, takes pride in it, and in a way claims a role of a leader in Central Eastern Europe, right? And showing with this special role that it has special ambitions and wants, others to follow. Now let's put together the aspiring state with an established one. Before we interpret what's on the picture on the painting, I would just say that I had once a chance to talk to Condoleezza Rice, and I asked her this question: so could you define for me what is Messianism? I said, this is very simple. Messianism is about the will that you want to go to the world and change the world into your own image and liking. So if you're United States, you want everywhere to be like United States, democracy, liberalism, and so on and so forth. And I thought about it, well, okay, this is a definition, but in fact it does depicts the essence of not even American, but let's say Anglo-Saxon Messianism, or maybe we could say Western, but let's stay with Anglo-Saxons, but definitely not Russian Messianism. Because the substance of Russian Messianism is a bit different than the one described by Condoleezza Rice. If I were to put these two, I would exactly use this kind of contrast that, let's say Western Messianism is a kind of crusader one. This is a Messianism of established countries, that you feel self-confident, that you cracked the logic of the history, you have it, you decide about the criteria anyway, who's right, who's wrong. And so you have this ontological, if you want, self-confidence that allows you to go, you want to venture into the world and you want to bring the fruit of the progress to everybody else. You want to turn them into your own image and liking. So it's hegemonic, right? And in the Russian case, they rather, the sense of mission is about guarding, restoring the order, protecting, So in a way, it's mostly counter-hegemonic when it comes to relations with the West. It's a reaction to this kind of messianic narratives of dominance which comes from the West, starting with 19th century through German Romanticism. We won't go into the details, but it got shaped in reaction to Western narratives, right? So it's more a reaction than, this kind of sovereign narrative. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that, Crusader is more aggressive than the shield holder, because Russia would depict itself as this kind of shield holder. No, it can be a very aggressive shield holder, right? Especially if you say that I came here to save you even if you don't want to be saved, right? But in a way, Russian Messianism is in a subaltern position to the Western narratives. And if we can compare it, let's put United Kingdom and Russia. So United Kingdom Messianic narrative is definitely progressive. So about bringing the fruit, of progress, modernity, how we have it in the United Kingdom to other nations in the world. In Russia, it's rather stopping the progress coming or being selective about it, restoring the order, keeping at bay the new trends. In United Kingdom, it's hegemonic in a sense that it is to serve the dominance of United Kingdom and the order which serves interest of the West, let's say, or United Kingdom and the West. In Russia, it's counter-hegemonic, so a reaction to this kind of normative pressure it experienced from the outside. An interesting element that in the Messianic narratives of established states, you do have a current of leading by example. When it comes to United Kingdom or United States, it's very clearly there. So you don't have to every time be this kind of active crusader who goes, and really builds liberal democracies everywhere. But you can say, okay, we'll be more passive, but even this passiveness will be simply, this white city upon hill. So a place where everybody will orient towards us and will lead by example, right? In Russia's Messianic tradition, it's not that much emphasized. It's rather, but there are auto-missions. And auto-mission, this is a Messianic role which you ascribe to yourself, in which you say, I have to first save myself in order to be able to save later the whole world. So this is something what established states then don't have. United Kingdom, we have to first save Britain to be able to save the world. No, because you're self-confident. In case of Russia, it's there since 19th century. You have to first, close Russia, so this kind of picture of besieged fortress, save the true spirit of Russia, the true values, and only then we can go and save the world from the apocalypse. Also, the two central values are different. Western Messianism is about freedom, right? To bring freedom to others. In Russia, this is justice. Again, this is more, if you think about the value of an underdog, that you feel that the playing ground is not equal, so you want to level and you want, the fair treatment. And again, the different two figures which would symbolize it, the crusader for Anglo-Saxon and the shield holder for Russia. So if you think about depictions, there is a difference. We say, Americans, they have sense of mission. Russians they have sense of missions, but their essence is different. This would be more the Russian one, the besieged fortress, which has to hold the fort, and this, okay, Boris Johnson forcing, fighting, and turning the world into its own ancient liking. With my colleague, we did a paper where we compared, so now to bring some proofs to what I'm saying, I haven't just made it up. We made a paper and compare narratives, in Russia, then you know already, but also in the United Kingdom, because after Brexit, they came up with a new kind of political idea, Global Britain. You have many documents produced about this notion by politicians, but the main idea was that Brexit doesn't mean isolation. We are going to be active, and it's simply a new phase of United Kingdom going global all over the place. And it had all the three elements of Messianic thinking, so moral superiority, the idea that you've been chosen and you have a special role in the world, and that it's for everyone, it's universal, it's not just for United Kingdom. So we found those four, let's call it Messianic roles: leadership provider, modern crusader, environmental steward, benevolent knight. And just, I think the quotations will be better than any description. So, as you see, Jeremy Hunt, 2019, Britain's hand in designing and defending the world order in the last century surely reveals our mission for the next. Not a superpower, but a global power, right? And then playing a decisive role in making the world safer, healthier, and wealthier. The whole world, right? Not just the Great Britain. Our sense of national purpose has always been defined by more than narrow self-interest. Everybody needs Global Britain. If you haven't known now you know. It's not enough to lead. We need to make sure we are taking everyone along with us, right? This is not just in the interest of British citizens, all people around the world. Global Britain is a force for good in the world. I mean, this is, quintessential, right? We will continue to champion British values around the globe. Global Britain is a protector, wealth bringer, a problem solver, a lifesaver, and a peace broker. Yeah? So you see, not just crazy Russians, crazy Brits and crazy people all around the world, right? So far we've been talking about European countries, right? Poland, Russia, United Kingdom. Because in a way, talking about mission in foreign policy, this is historically a European business. Because it takes, Christian legacy, for starters. You have to have, the figure of Messiah and the whole, let's say, religious structure, if I may say so. Plus, what makes it much more probable that you will have Messianic narrative developed in a country is that there was imperial past. With Serbia and Poland, we can then discuss in Q&A to what extent this kind of attempts to create a regional power was the reason that we, as both nations, have this tradition, but let's leave it for later. So, these two elements, the imperial past and the Judeo-Christian tradition, makes this kind of fertile ground for historical development of Messianic narratives, right? So this is a European phenomenon which, with colonialism, was spread later all over the globe, we could say so. So colonialism was important. And now my question is, okay, so how about non-European countries? Do they also have Messianic narratives? And let me just very shortly discuss three cases. So China, Japan, and India. Neither China nor Japan were colonized, right? But they had different approach to encounters with the West and modernity, right? Japan decided for a preemptive action. They decided to copy the solution of the West selectively, so very much in this kind of copying mode. They were, 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And in this context, they did also copy the Messianic narrative. Especially in the beginning of the 20th century, it's kind of idea that Japan is predestined to free Asia from Europeans, to bring the progress, to show the way to modernity, so it's there. But this is a part of this kind of emulation strategy And with the end of the Second World War, it doesn't really appear. Doesn't mean that Japan doesn't feel exceptional. They do feel extremely exceptional. Yeah? They feel, of course, they feel extremely exceptional, but they don't express it that they have a mission in foreign policy. Now you take China. This is a different story. Also never colonized, but China, until the very last moment, in a way, couldn't even imagine it could be threatened by the Westerners. If you read books, I don't know, Garrett Gong and so on, like how China simply, it was beyond its, I don't know, civilizational imaginary that China can be threatened by barbarians, let's put it this way. So it never developed a Messianic narrative. China feels extremely exceptional, but because it feels so exceptional, it thinks nobody else can copy this. You see, this is a completely different take to exceptionalism than we have in Europe, which is based on Judeo-Christian tradition. You know, if you're exceptional and you think you know the truth, you have to bring it to others. China doesn't have it. We are so special, you cannot repeat it, sorry, right? So I would say that these are the cases of non-Messianic exceptionalism, right? Although these are two, let's say, great powers, right? So they would be the classical suspects to have Messianic edge in their foreign policy, but it's not there. And then finally, India. I'm not an expert on India, but relying on the papers which I've read, there are scholars who claim there are references to mission in India's narrative on its foreign policy. So they do refer to their moral superiority, and they say they had this kind of special know-how, which is to harmonize and soothe ethnic religious civilization differences, that the world should let India, learn from India and let India lead in certain aspects of international affairs. And definitely this very Anglo-Saxon, leading by example, right? So, and it's a way I would say, I would interpret it in this way, that it's a consequence of being colonized and being socialized into discourses of Anglo-Saxon European tradition. So you use it in order to signal to the Westerners, we are claiming the seat at the table, we are equal, and we are using your language to get it. Yeah. And in a way, Russia does the same. The problem with Russia is that it is, and this is a question, I don't mean for you to discuss if you want, whether this is a European country or not, because the opinions can be different here, I imagine. But this is a country which is so similar, so well, in a way, socialized by European system, and it feels every time kind of estranged. So this is much more painful for Russia than for India in a way. Okay, I made it complicated. Maybe we'll come back to this later. Okay, now Russia. I hope you can still bear with me. You're not bored. I mean, a few minutes more and we're done. Okay, because this was my main object of research, right? Whether Russia is using this after foreign policy, or using, maybe it's not the right word, whether it's there, the Messianic narrative. So now, I told you in the beginning, so we analyzed 25,000 documents. It's a lot, and now the shameful secret, it's not a secret, but the shameful element is here, that only in 4% of these documents you have references to mission. So you can say, well, God, she's been doing this for 8 years, 25,000 documents, and only 4%. Why did she come here with this lecture? Because only now it's getting really interesting, right? But so first of all, I could say, hey, we proved it, that Russia is not all about Messianic narrative, which many scholars claim, especially after annexation of Crimea. But now you see, Russia, they are just about their historic mission and it's there. That's not true. They use different narratives to make their point, not referring to mission. Moreover, you have Russian leading state officials who officially, when asked about Russia's mission, they will deny it. And usually the argument is, we've learned our lesson from the Soviet Union. Messianism was one of the reasons why the Soviet Union fell apart, and we've done it. We've learned it. We are just pragmatics. We are just pursuing national interests, so no mission there. So you have a disclaimer, an official one, repeated on many occasions for many years, and yet they do refer to mission. right? They do refer to mission, they use this narrative, so the question will be, how come? You deny it, and yet it keeps back. And my interpretation is because, not only in Russian understanding, but now I'm just talking about Russia, if you want to claim that you are a true great power, you have to pursue a mission in the world. This is how you define a true great power. It's not enough to, I don't know, manufacture cars, to have a good trade saldo, I don't know, to have high tech. This is all important. These are all important attributes. But you know a true great power if it pursues a grand mission in the world. And because of this idea, and great power is the most important component of post-Soviet Russia's identity, Messianic narrative is still there and it's important. And the fact that I haven't made it up, just look at Sergei Karaganow's, this is like Putin's advisor, leading Russian political scientist. He said, the world is full of the graves and corpses of major powers which have lost their sense of mission. One of the foundations of a world power, and obviously Russia can be anything else, is the pursuit of a grand idea. For its own sake, of course, and for the sake of others, right? It's never just for our own sake. And one more thing, for a moment going back to this global Britain thing and Russia, and the critical situation, right, notion, because definitely, although different in scope and size, the fall of the Soviet Union was definitely a critical situation for Russia. So, you know, a situation that undermines the basic notions, ideas you have about yourself, reality, security, and so on and so forth. And in a way, Brexit did the same to Brits, as I said, although different in scope, right? So, the mission narratives, which appeared in UK after 2016 and in Russia appeared in a way differently, I will explain it in a moment, they work as a kind of self-help mechanism. So you're crushed, your ontological security or self-confidence is low, so you look for something familiar, right? Something what can give you the sense of security. And both those countries, former empires and now great powers, they rely on the narratives connected to the image and understanding what the great power is. But the interesting fact is that these two narratives appear differently. In case of global Britain, this was, we would say, a political manipulation. So we have the Conservative Party, which decided that the people need something now after Brexit, a grand vision of Great Britain, so we'll give them global Britain with the Messianic edge. Yeah? So it was a political project, constructed, designed, and that promoted to the people. And immediately after 2016, it appeared very fast. But in the case of Russia, it was rather a gradual resurface. You know, so in the 90s, especially with Yeltsin, you had this kind of attempt to really redefine Russia's identity, defined as a great power, but like of leaving the imperial legacy. It failed for a reason we can discuss later. And in fact, this Messianic narrative, it appears slowly, I would say, since the first big spike is with the color revolutions. The color revolutions, which happened in Ukraine, Georgia, the first big confrontation with the West, which kind of, on one hand, questions Russia's position in former Soviet empire and pushes it into thinking, okay, we are a great power, we need to do this and this. So it came to Russia differently than in global Britain. Now these are the, probably I'm talking, okay, I'll have to finish because you will die bored here. So let me put it short. So these are the roles which we retrieved analyzing the discourse of Russia. A lot of them, here they are described. Most of them, they've been there in 19th century, like like Breach or the Guardian of Justice, the Balance Provider. There are just two with the post-Soviet notion. I will show you them in a moment. Here are the the quotations, but I think we can come back to them simply. They are just, or you want to have two tasty quotations. How do you feel about it?
Let's see the quotations.
Let's see the quotations. This is a classic one. It's long, but I will just give you a synopsis. So, the general idea that Russia has been saving Europe regularly since the beginning of time. You know, first the Batu Khan, the Mongols, then Napoleon, then the Hitler. Also, the Balkan nations have been saved from Ottoman slavery. So, Russia is the great savior and the shield of Europe, right? Then you have, our country is historically entitled to the role of one of the leading centers of the contemporary world, providing values, security, and stability. Then you have more about Orthodox values and leading the Orthodox nations, that this is traditional mission of our country. Also certain is that Russia, this is put in 2005, should continue its civilizing mission on the Euro-Asian continent. This is exactly when Russia positions itself as the hegemon, and then it uses the language of, Greece towards India and France towards African nations, right? A civilizing mission. Then you have, very much in this. We taught why Russia, the civilizing mission of Russia. We taught millions of people to speak Russian. There are universities in the far-flung corners of the Russian Empire, schools opened during Soviet rule in every kishlak and aul. We plowed virgin fields and made all medicines available. National theaters, galleries, created from scratch. Some even call us colonialists, invaders, but all this is transitory in nature, like childhood illnesses. Everything will pass and will still move the wheel created by our great culture towards the future, right? So maybe here the last quotation, the mission is also about conquering space. Since the very beginning of the space age, we have been aware of our special historic mission. And we have not just explored space, we have had a spiritual attachment to space. It has been the object of our national pride. Okay. When you analyze and read and you find those messianic roles, you see that the narrative wouldn't hold if it hadn't been for the West. In a way, the West has a central role in this story. It's the apocalypse, the main source of threat, and that's why Russia has to act to restrain or to protect the world, the region, Orthodox nations, Slavic nations, you name it, from the threat created by the West. Is it a physical threat? Is it a threat to their cultural identities? Regardless, but Russia is predestined to play this role. But also, the West can be an object of Russia's mission. Russia is ready to save the West, definitely Europe, even the West, if only the West allows it to act and to fulfill its role. Also, there is a mechanism where usually Russian state officials, they say that it's the West which is messianic, and it's not Russia. That they say messianics, but this is something what the West does, and they criticize West for this. But then this is a typical othering mechanism, because they use it as, we don't do it, the West does it, and this is bad. But then in the next step, a counter-hegemonic step, they come up with their own formula of exceptionalism. That we believe that states are not exceptional, but unique and equal in their uniqueness, and this is God's principle. So the Messianic narrative is also meant to build Russia's moral superiority, to mark the difference between the West and Russia and other countries which are to be saved and protected by the Russian state. And two final points, and I told you what is really surprising is how sticky historically the narrative is. Again, those roles, so the one in red, these are the only two new Messianic roles which weren't there in the 19th century when Slavophiles and religious philosophers of Russia, they were elaborating Messianic narrative. These two are connected to post-Soviet context. Maker of Ruski Mir, of course, this is the Russia's mission towards diaspora, which happened to be outside Russia's borders after 1991. And Keeper of Historic Truth is about Russia, who's predestined to keep the right memory about the Second World War, who was the winner, who was the loser, who was liberator, and who wasn't, right? But otherwise, bridge, moderator of the dialogue, custodian of Europe, it's all there in 19th century. So if you think about it, you have the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and then again the post-Soviet Russia, and this narrative is really quite solid. And my interpretation would be that this is the position of Russia, this kind of aspiring subaltern states in relation to the West, which, as in 19th century, can't get the full recognition as an equal by the West, and so it goes and relies on the Messianic narrative to on one hand to emulate the great powers' behavior, and on the other to compensate and to tell a story to itself about its exceptionalism, right? And there is one more thing which I should say here, because then you could say, how about Soviet Union? Because the Soviet Union and the Soviet Messianism, if you think about it, it's really not representative for Russian tradition. This is the only time, and if you take it as a part of Russia, let's say Russian history, when it's in fact a Messianism of an established country. Because Soviet Union is exactly in a position, especially since, let's say, the 70s, late 60s, of finally recognized by the West as an equal one. An enemy, but an equal one, another superpower, right? And it has this ontological, if you want to say, self-confidence, so it does want to venture to the world. It does want to turn the world into its own image and liking, to have other communistic countries in the world. So, in a way, Soviet Messianism is Messianism of an established country, and not of an aspired one. It doesn't have the compensatory element. It doesn't have automissions, but rather leading as an example. So it's rather an exception than the rule. Okay, the last point, I promise. So because it's maybe a preemptive step, you would ask me, okay, do they believe in this? So they talk about this, right? But
Phantom.
All right, phantom. Because I really know that I'm already running out of time, because talking for 40 minutes, this is too much for listeners, but okay. Phantom Messianism is how I understand the today's state of Messianism in Russia. So, in a way, those are narratives, routines created in the imperial past, right? Empire is not there anymore, but the narratives, habits, they linger, right? So, in a way, with the invasion, things again got a bit more complicated, but these are like routines and habits which stayed, although the empire is gone. So, in this way, they're a phantom. Yeah, and now so do they believe in this? So the point shared by the elites and the masses in Russia is definitely that the majority of them, as you can see, the numbers don't change much. They agree that Russia should be a great power. That this is something that is important to people in Russia. That you are living in a country which is a great power, respected, feared in the world, and all what comes with this. So you see 88%, and I said this doesn't differ much. But then the difference comes with either ask ordinary Russians or the elite. So ordinary Russians, only 1/3 of them would like their country to pursue a grand mission in the world, and they would be ready for a self-sacrifice in the name of the grand mission. So it means that majority or big chunk of ordinary Russians, they would like their country to be great power due to the reforms and not pursuing a mission. They would like to have, good roads, efficient hospitals, good economy, and so on. They would like simply this kind of domestic growth and not international pursuing mission, right? But then when you're talking to the elite, and this is a research by Russian sociologists, you have 78% saying that Russia is destined for greatness and should pursue a mission. So this is maybe a kind of, but this is more probably for sociologists to dwell. I'm not an expert in this. This is kind of mechanism of consolidating an elite of a former empire, Once you're responsible for conducting foreign policy, you associate more to the state, then this element of greatness connected to pursuing mission becomes important. Something also what comes in the UK with Global Britain and in Russia is this kind of conviction expressed openly by the elite. We talk about this because people need it. You know, you as an elite, you assume that the ordinary citizens, they need the vision of greatness and grand mission in order to prosper. And as you see, it's not reflected in the polls of ordinary citizens. They claim this as we don't need it, but somehow the elites project it on them. As I said, with the Russian invasion, Messianic narratives, of course, is more, let's say, in the front, because it's used also to legitimate the conflict. And now this is the last slide. I will end with the long, but nevertheless I'll read it all, quotation by Alexei Levinson. This is like a well-known Russian sociologist who already almost a year after invasion, he wrote something like this. So one should be skeptical about the widespread justification that this state of Russian consciousness is solely the result of propaganda. Propaganda can do a lot, but it has its limits. Propaganda only formalizes and articulates the configurations of meaning which are formed in mass consciousness due to internal and external factors. Propaganda is only one of them. These mass perceptions are long entrenched. They represent the complex outcome of the transformation of ideas about Russia's mission, which have developed over several centuries in the Russian ruling class. So he's pointing to the elite, and which have outlived the class. The ideas were unconsciously embraced by Russia's victorious new elites who imagined Russia leading the liberation of mankind. Then the goal of liberation was forgotten, but the idea of standing at the helm of half of the world, if not the whole world, remained. So pointing to the elite, pointing to the imperial legacy, and kind of mechanics, the subconscious mechanics of routines and habits which were shaped a long time ago. All right, we made it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
You asked me all the questions you want, but I also want to hear about Serbian Messianics. Okay.
We'll talk about it. Thank you for a wonderful lecture. I will now open it up for questions and comments from the audience.
Thank you. So I loved your lecture, and so to introduce myself, I'm a PhD student here, and I'm researching Russian invasion of Ukraine. So there are two questions that I have. One in particular is, I think that the sense of mission has been embedded in the identity, and that status in society, as through state society complex somehow affected Putin's sense of mission himself, that he has to fulfill some certain missions before he dies, essentially. And second question is about the Russian hypersonic program, namely the Avangard, which he stated that it's like a fireball, like a meteorite. Do you think that that's an example of messianism, not just simple missionism, but messianism?
Okay, about hypersonic, I really can't say, whether this is a sign of messianism or not. But about the identity, if I got the question right. So the way it works, identity is there, and that's the structure. Right? And because identity is so much centralized around the idea of Russia as a great power, it creates a certain framework. And of course, Vladimir Putin, although I don't know how it is in Serbia, in Poland, he's perceived as a calculating machine. He has his Excel table in head, he just makes his choices, advantages, pros, cons, and then and he has the optimal result. So this kind of rational actor theory completely. Of course, this is not the whole truth about Vladimir Putin. I would say this is not the whole truth about each politician, right? Every one of us, each individual is socialized to the structure, let's say, of the culture, your race. So Vladimir Putin, before he became the president, he went to Soviet schools, he read Soviet books, he watched Soviet films, and then he watched some other things. So he got the formative socialization within the context which was pretty much imperial, right? If you think about the Soviet Union, it kept the imperial structure, right? So this identity and the structure, it did influence him. He's to a certain extent a product of it. It is a part of his identity, and having said that, yet, as with each identity narrative, you can manipulate it and you can instrumentalize it, right? So as long as you do it within the framework which already exists, you have high chances that it will be perceived by people as a legitimate one, that you will be able to mobilize people, right? Because if the question comes down whether he believes in his mission, would it be a part of your question?
Yeah, so that did he start conflating basically his own mission with Russian mission, like all the mission of self-preservation?
How can I know this? I mean,
Yeah.
even if I ask you, if I have in my life chance to interview Vladimir Putin, does your mission is now conflated to Russia's mission? Even if he says yes, should I believe him?
True, yeah.
Because I don't even know if he's able to self-diagnose himself, right? So whether he's a man on a personal mission, I think it's safe to say yes. He does seem like a guy who thinks about history, right, and making his mark in history. And after so many years in power, he could conflate these two. But I wouldn't exclude the fact that he's also being manipulative about certain elements. For sure, a part of the elite it is manipulative about, mission narrative. So, as usual, things are complicated. Is it okay? About hypersonic? You can't say.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. Maybe
I also have 3 questions, but
I think I have more.
Okay.
Thank you very much for a wonderful lecture. And I'm also a PhD candidate here at the faculty, and your research is very inspiring for me. Is that I believe I'm doing something similar with the Serbian foreign policy, because I try to introduce the concept of common sense and capture the foreign policy common sense in among the elites and the public, and try to see the gap in between them. So I have like a couple of questions, so maybe we can now tackle a couple of them, and then. So the theoretical question I had in mind was, by the end of the presentation, you practically illuminate the gap which exists between the elites and the masses about this narrative or the story of the Messianic exceptionalism. So how this gap is actually possible? For how long can it persist in Russian or in any society that you have like the elites with some common sense or narrative about the self, and then the public with a rather different one? And how do you see this changing? Like whether it will trickle down or the public one will trickle up at some point and the elites will adopt it?
Stop. So I will answer one by one.
Okay.
I think as long as you don't have a democratic country, you really don't have to care about it, if you think about it. I mean, Brits, they have to be much more careful not to overdo it, right? Because they can pay the price when the election comes. In the reality of today's Russia, especially after invasion, where it's a crucial, it's everything, it's really, the freedom to express whatever in public space, what is not in sync with the official discourse is criminalized in a way, yeah? So you really don't have to care that much about the gap, because what would be the consequences if you keep doing this? Because even if you think about the efficiency, because this would be the main question, right? Because this is what I ask myself, how come are they using mission narrative if obviously this shows that this shouldn't work? This is not the people want to hear. Yeah, this is the puzzle. This is the puzzling element here. Usually when I ask my Polish colleagues, experts who do serious things, without this, serious things, they say simply they have anything else to use. They simply have to rely on the Messianic narrative because this is what they've been doing since, 18th century or whatever. 16th century if you want to go with the Moscow as the third Rome, yeah? I think they could come up with a different narrative. So my own understanding is this is exactly somewhere this subconscious habit which comes. They've been, lingering not rather from the Soviet times than from the Russian Empire, this kind of understanding that people need this is what I said at the end. The elites understanding that people need to hear their country is great, that is pursuing a grand idea. And since they don't care for the, bottom reaction, they can go on this. So
you would say that the major argument would be like just the quality of democracy. And if you don't have democracy, the elites do not have to care about the public opinion.
I mean,
in terms of foreign policy.
I mean, of course, they have to care a bit. I mean, a bit, at least a bit, or like this. Maybe they have to care at least a bit because they want to be perceived as legitimate, right? They don't want to just use sheer violence to keep the mandate, right? And this is because, okay, we are drifting, but if you think about it, I really wonder whether in the Russian Federation they could cancel elections. If you think about it as an institution. In the logic of the anti-Western discourse, could you sell it to the people that this is a Western invention and we'll do it differently in Russia? I don't know whether they could, but from some reason they keep having elections, although everybody knows that they are not, this is just a show, that they are staged, and yet they take this, risks, routine, and they do these elections. So, okay, but I went far. But so they do care to be legitimate. They don't want to just use pressure. So, of course, they want to receive a kind of feedback, whether it works or not. But in the reality of authoritarian state, it's really hard to get the real feedback, right? So maybe I would end here. The sociological polls, this doesn't work. You have your own kind of ideas what works, and they think Messianic narrative works. And since they can't be really politically punished for the mistakes, they simply do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'll just let you know. Thank you.
I'll see.
So there was one. Maybe I'll leave it at the end. I wanted also to hear, because in the dissertation, one of the major typologies I make is actually I use the concept of stickiness and propose this division between the sticky and non-sticky foreign policies. But then I will leave this for a discussion later. What I wanted actually to ask you more is about the methodology. I saw like there was an impressive sample about what you've actually coded, I guess, in some way doing the content analysis. So could you tell us more about the process in brief, in a way that how did you induce those roles? Was it completely inductive or how did you do it? And also in terms of this comparison to the public sentiments, were the public, the opinion polls, were they directly, like did you use the lessons and the codes you used for or is it just something which was already there and okay. And the last question.
So wait. Yes, about the sociological polls, I rely on what Russians do. Either they do interviews or polling. So I use everything what I can find. What the Russians do, I use it. Now about methodology for the project. Now, this is a scary part. We did it manually.
25,000.
Yes.
You say we.
How many?
I have 3 more students, and then one of them convinced his wife to join, so 4. So together we were 5 of us. But it was necessary, because the idea was to use keywords, and we have, now I don't remember exactly, but I think almost 50 different keywords. We had to go misja, messianstvo, different, the third Rome. You have to think about all the things you can put there, because you want to be inductive about it, right? You don't want to just go for a mission or something, so it was broad. And you have to do it manually, because if you have misja, most of the things will be about diplomatic mission or humanitarian mission. So if you put it to a program, it won't simply find it, So the context was so important, we did it manually. So on one hand, we used keywords, a lot of them, but just not to be slave of our keywords, we also used another key to select text, and we went for types of statements. Because in this kind of preliminary research, we noticed that usually they will talk about mission if this is like, for example, a longer kind of statement. So no press releases, but let's say articles written for journals, interviews, and those occasional kind of ceremonial addresses. So we read all of them, not just using the keywords. So we read all, ceremonial address for Dzień Pobiedy and so on and so forth. There were like, I don't know, several this kind of keys. So we read all interviews, or articles, and so on and so forth. So with this time, going to 2 ways of selection, we got this 25. And then we were coding this. We have our table and then looking for things. I hope I remember, but so references to identity, status, other worlds, or geopolitical kind of conclusions, of course, to mission, to moral superiority, to universalism, the vision of history, and so on and so forth. So a huge table, and then quotations, labels, and all what comes with content.
Quantitative or just
Well, it was. This is content. This was a content because we're putting.
It can be either quantitative or qualitative. Did you have numerical values, or you just did the qualitative?
Just qualitative in this way, so the content and the labels, yeah. So that's it. And the third question.
Yeah, and the third one was more like a prognostic one. So at the beginning, you mentioned that you made this division between messianic and non-messianic narratives of the great powers. So, in your opinion, does it help in terms of prospects of becoming a world hegemon? Does it help to have a messianic narrative autobiography or a non-messianic one? Because the two of the examples like China and India, we see them as prospective hegemons. In some
I know, this is a great question, and I think that the answer would be, as long as the normative underpinning of world order is Western-made, messianic narrative is a kind of code which is used by great powers. Although it's a habit, but because we are living in the world, in the international affairs, where the normative ideas are produced, controlled by the West, right? Historically, if you think about the modern world. So once the China takes over, and it will have a significant symbolic power, this might change, because it won't be, it will be out of the framework will be different. Yeah. So I would expect that this will change.
Thank you.
The question is how Russia will deal with it when the thing changes.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
I will still withhold my questions. So others can ask, and I will ask again.
Maybe one question. I'm mostly interested in the role theory, so I really find this understanding of messianic role something that combines this theorizing and this interaction, that kind of perspective. But when it comes to Russia's roles, how do you then assess Ruski Mir as a concept, and how it actually connects to this idea of messianism and roles? Because you deal with the great powers, messianic roles, and maybe there are some, when you were asking about the possible Serbian case, there's something known as cis-fpn, one of the concepts, so maybe it's not that messianic, but still it has some sense of a role, and if you are into Russia's Ruski Mir analysis, so what would you bring to the discussion from Russia that can be interesting for our own context here? Since in the political discourse, it's also this kind of translation that, for example, Russia's influence can be interpreted as, giving some ideas to Serbian decision makers, political elites, and something that they can project as maybe some kind of this, as you term it, one of these losing sides, compensatory terms to make some kind of role status within a small state region.
Great question. I will definitely say that Ruski Mir as a concept, it's not messianic, but it has changed since it got visible, and it got visible in the so around 2005, 2006. In 2007, you have the found Ruski Mir established. So Ruski Mir as a concept is a reaction once it becomes visible in the foreign policy of Russia, because before, of course, it exists in the intellectual circles already in the 90s, but as a part of, let's say, Russia's foreign agenda, this is a reaction to color revolutions and this kind of understanding of Russia that soft power is important, the West has its own soft power, and due to its soft power, it reorientates post-Soviet republics. So we have to have a counter-offer, and we have to act. I mean, the dominance of Russian culture in post-Soviet space is not given anymore, right? This becomes clear with the color revolutions. So one of the ideas, this is Ruski Mir, and it is to have this soft power element, so to create sense of community, and not only to Russian speakers, because the formula which is there in the beginning is to everyone who feels attached to Russia, has a sentiment, likes Russian culture. So very broad, in this definition, I'm a part of Ruski Mir, absolutely, right? But then, with time, it has changed, especially with annexation of Crimea. It became more, weaponized or more ideologized, and it's not just, so all-inclusive, but more about Russian diaspora. And the Messianic tones this is just how in Russian official discourse, Russia's responsibility to protect Russian-speaking people is framed, that we are predestined, and this is our mission to do it. So the Russian world, Ruski Mir as itself, this is not a Messianic concept, definitely. But with times, the tones, how Russia's role towards this space has been defined, changed, and it got this Messianic edge, yeah. And how it relates to Srpski svet, I don't know, but maybe I will learn something. I know it wasn't a question to me, but I wonder.
But in the common public discourse, there are many comments that it's an idea that can be copied elsewhere. So how a small state can copy such a great power idea with making some kind of sphere of influence, what kind of influence is it? Cultural, economic, compatriotic, whatever sphere of influence.
In the statements of Russian officials, and for example, if you take a look into Russian Geographical Association, Serbia is usually mentioned as a part of Ruski Mir, just on the margin. This is Ruski Mir. Belarus, of course, but also Serbia. Montenegro, not anymore. Well, yes.
Good to know. I wasn't aware of this.
It's there. It's a Ruski Mir friendly country. Yeah. Any other?
I have a few questions. Thank you very much. It's extremely inspiring. I have three quick questions. The first one is related to your pecking order, division of states into established ones, aspiring ones, and the losers. I wonder, does this kind of exclude a possibility that the small states can be successful and happy in its own skin? Because if we divide states into established great powers, aspiring great powers, and losers, it reminds me a little bit of this Trumpian worldview in which there are alpha males, those who try to be alpha males, and everybody else is just a loser. So where is the space for successful, self-confident, small states in this division? Can they be happy in their skin and confident, even though they can never be a great power because of objective limitation of material power? I have two more. I can.
Wait. Okay, so immediately this one. No, this is a very good question. Of course, there is a space for happy small nations. Take Slovenia or also Czechia. Those are my favorite cases of small nation which hasn't ever developed a messianic narrative, right? And they are happy. They might have some concerns about certain issues, but in general, they are quite satisfied. So this is thank you for this remark, because it again goes back, because if you're a loser, you must feel you have lost something, right? So okay, you can have this feeling, historically develop this feeling because you're not satisfied that you're small, but usually it's connected to, if you think about Serbia and Poland, to a historical attempt you had for greatness and you failed.
So it's only former states who used to have messianic or have some sort of
this was But if we think about, we will have to make the whole kind of Excel table with all small nations of Europe and see which one of them have messianic narratives. There was an article about Bosnia messianic narrative, They are definitely not happy, right? But did they have an empire? Unless they felt as a part of Ottoman Empire, and because of this they feel maybe. But there are different combinations. But I think this kind of at least historic attempt at greatness has something to do with it. Yeah.
No, that's good. Then the second question is related to this picture that you kind of painted of Russian Messianism. You did show historically how it evolved, but I didn't see a space for contention and the kind of debate. Is there a debate within Russia today about those different roles, or the picture is as monolithic due to the consolidation of Putin regime in the media? I mean, there must be something lurking on the margin that we didn't see here, some contestation of the left or the right. Where's the space for this long-standing debate between Slavophiles and Eurosophiles? I mean, is it still ongoing, or the differences and the kind of opposition to the mainstream is totally eradicated in Russia, in the text that you analyzed?
Well, the thing is that we analyzed the official political discourse. So we didn't go for intellectuals, different kind of groups, academic discourses. So what this is this is sheer politics, right? What's in foreign policy? And there was quite a coherent way of making this discourse. It's not just Vladimir Putin that he's doing this, but there was a certain hierarchy. So there was Vladimir Putin, and he's the guy who's setting the tone. And then you would have different kind of ambassadors, Lavrov and other state officials, which would pick elements and they would creatively elaborate them, right? And in this way, this is coherent. And you don't see, and definitely now after invasion, this kind of conflicts, tension, saying this is more important, that is more important. No, it's, you have those roles. Depending on the context, sometimes these roles are more emphasized, that one less, but otherwise this is more or less the picture. The three most important roles is the guardian of justice, the balance provider, and the shield. These are really the most often referred to, making kind of what's the core of Russia's Messianic calling in today's world. But when it comes to the intellectuals, sure we will find it. Now again, after the invasion, it's much harder and somewhere underground, but this wasn't a part of the project here. But of course, the pluralism probably we should expect to be there.
And finally, if Messianism narrative, Messianic narrative is part and parcel of great power, because at the end of the lecture you concluded that this mere aspiration to become a great power contains some sort of requirement to have also Messianic aspiration, because if you're great, then it means you're not only great for yourself, but also great for humanity. How come China doesn't have it? Because China definitely has an aspiration to be the next superpower and par with the states, and yet we don't see Messianism. I mean, do they get it wrong, or is it about time when China will discover that it also needs to have some sort of Messianic add-on to their claims to great power, or there is something else culturally different going on?
No, I mean, what they're absolutely missing is the Judeo-Christian tradition to go and develop full-size Messianic narrative in their foreign policy. This is this example of non-Messianic exceptionalism. You do feel special, but you simply think that nobody else can follow your steps. Yeah. So there are Jin Kanrong. This was the Chinese intellectual who was writing, for example, about Russia, Benjamin Ho. They are writing about Russian exceptionalism, and they show it as a development of Chinese nationalism. But both emphasize that this we can say maybe still, but thinking about the historic trajectory, I wouldn't say still, they haven't translated into Messianic kind of calling, right? Assignments, I mean, a role of a leader, yes, but something like go and to change the world into the image of liking of China, it's not there. And this is the cultural legacy in a way, right? That you express your exceptionalism differently than using the Messiah figure.
But recently, I mean, they have started, or maybe not so recently, but a couple of maybe a couple of years at least, they started propelling this discourse that China is good also for the world because it will bring some sort of balance back to the world, multipolarity, also the respect for territorial integrity, but also this kind of prosperity or whatever they call it. Like the world will be focusing on prosperity and then the Belt and Road, which is also benefiting others. I mean, there are, it seems to me, some elements of Messianic narrative, if we define it as a mission to also salvage the rest of the world in order to protect yourself. But I agree that it's way less prominent than in the case of the West, Russia to an extent.
I can rely only on the words of people who analyze Chinese politics, and they do emphasize that China says we have a mission to be the teacher of the world, right? But this idea that you're predestined and this kind of moral superiority, I don't know, maybe this will happen with this kind of narrative being developed, but at least from the research which was there and was related to Chinese exceptionalism, the sense of mission was openly, by those researchers rejected, that this is something what differs Chinese exceptionalism from European one.
Maybe it's also about how we perceive China, not what China tries to project.
It's interesting.
Us seeing China not being this. It's like this thesis about the greatest source of Russia's soft power is not being the States. It maybe applies also for the China. This is our understanding of China not being, intervening, etc. But maybe it's not seen in the official foreign policy discourse of China, saying we are not intervening and we will bring this world which is more balanced, etc. I don't know.
But also kind of very defensive because they want to defend the current, let's say, the UN Charter. They want to respect the UN Charter. They want to respect the rules, Westphalian rules of territorial integrity, sovereignty. They don't want to kind of revolutionize the world any longer the way they wanted during the mandate of Mao during the Cultural Revolution. Now it's more like reactive, I think, and turned towards some sort of economic prosperity and interconnectedness of the world. But on equal basis, everyone is respected, multipolarity, but it's interesting if this is like the feature that sine qua non of great powerhood, then they will at some point realize what the Russians
this is sine qua non only in the normative framework created by us. That's the thing, right?
But can you become a great power without being recognized by the states and by the existing?
That's true, but if the rules of the games will be redefined by China more along its own, let's say, cultural software, this might change, because this is an understanding of great power which comes from European imperialism. So when this is less relevant, maybe we'll have another understanding of great power. Different attributes will be important, because it's an archaic attribute. This is really archaic, right? That you have to pursue a great idea in the world, yeah? But it's there, but it's archaic. So this is an open thing, right? Well, how we will what will be the attributes of great power? Whether this will stay. But now the Serbian Messianism, tell me, I will just come from the Polish side. Observing what happened in Poland after 1981, I would say that we didn't have serious or less serious political parties which would pick up on this narrative. Not even now with the invasion in Ukraine, okay, we have this, that we must unite, this is our war, and we have to protect Europe and so on, Russia is a threat, but without messianic overtones. And trying to understand, I think, because in a way our status ambitions have been fulfilled by joining NATO, by joining EU, we kind of got where we wanted. How does it look in Serbia with this messianic thing? Is it dead? Is it there?
I don't see that we have such a strong messianic. There are some elements, and you alluded to like the memories of past empires from the Middle Ages. Poland used to have this Commonwealth with Lithuania, and used to perceive itself as some sort of regional hegemony. Serbia had its own golden age, centuries ago, and there are sometimes elements in the discourse. When I did my research, you could see, for instance, Serbia, by defending Kosovo, Serbia is defending international order. I mean, that's a Messianic element, right? It's not only the defense of our own territory, but we are defending the entire world. And then later on, once Western countries recognized the independence of Kosovo, when Georgia happened or Ukraine happened, many of the people in Serbia would say, we told you so. We try to defend the international order based on the respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty, but you disrespected us. Now you're paying the price. But it's more, I think, it's part of this narrative, but I wouldn't say that it's front and center. It's the most important element in Serbian, I'd say, nationalism or dominant discourse. It's more like srpski svet, preserving your own turf, your own, I mean, maybe going a little bit beyond your national boundaries to protect the Serbs in Bosnia, Montenegro, and Kosovo. And this is where it stops. I think those grand aspirations are really, I think it's there, but it's more like a phantom messianism than it's like a phantom limb. It's not no longer there, but you kind of have from time to time a reflex.
Sometimes,
but it's not like really central, I would say. But I don't know what other.
There is also one similarity. I know, kind of like the survey results from one project, and it's the thing it told about the public and how whether they share it or not. Like there was one question asking the public, what do you think, what should be the Serbia's role in the regional initiatives in terms of the open Balkan, etc. And then like about 40%, as usual with foreign policy, said they didn't know. And then a third, like 33% of people said Serbia should be equal to other regional partners, other states, and less than 30% said, 27 said Serbia should be a leader. So like not even a third of the population believes that Serbia should be a leader in the regional initiative, let alone wider aspirations.
It seems that most nations in Central Europe are simply tired of history, and simply want to have your cigarette in a way. I don't smoke,
but it used to be a part of Serbian nationalism in the 1990s, for instance, because there was this kind of myth of the bulwark of Christendom. The Serbs throughout history were the bulwark of Christendom, defending Europe from, Ottoman
it's the same in
Asiatic hordes, the same all over.
Ante murale Christianis.
Ante murale Christianis, that's correct. And then this kind of myth was instrumentally used by, for instance, Slobodan Milošević during his famous speech on the 600th anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo. So, and it's there, it's present, it's some kind of thread which repeats, but it's really not the driving force, I think, of the Serbian national. Now it's way more about protecting what's yours and really building your own territory or returning to the territory that you lost, maybe at best or at worst. But it's not changing the world or mission for the world. No, I think people are disillusioned with that, and they just want to. Maybe even I think that the Serbian nationalism is tilting towards isolationism way more than towards some sort of grand ideas and visions for the world. Like leave us alone and don't take more from us, kind of attitude. But that's my hunch. I don't know what others.
Is it in support that there is again, like from the same survey, this disappointment and the lesson learned being at the bulwark of Europe is something we are proud of, but something that is not like extremely beneficial. It doesn't do any good to Serbia. So it's like there is, I think, like close to 80% of the population believe, when you count those totally agree, and we believe that European states do not appreciate Serbia's role in history. So there is also disappointment in addition to this delusion.
And also, the policy of military neutrality, I think, is informed by this disillusionment. Oh, we joined so many alliances in the First World War, in
the Second World War, and then this world really didn't kind of didn't respect us or didn't help us when it was hard for us. In the 1990s, everybody turned their backs on us, and now we're going to, if there is a world apocalypse, the World War III, we're going to take some popcorn and like sit in our, I mean, I know it's a delusion, you cannot kind of be isolated from
Malo
such a
roštilja,
calamity.
malo pušenja po boku.
Yeah, but this time around, we're not going to be really in the first row. Yeah, I think that's the public sentiment at the moment. Yeah.
Very nice. This is a good premise for a TV series or something. It's like.
Anyways, I think.
Yeah, I know. Thank you so much.
I think our speakers deserve a round of applause.